Greetings and thank you for joining us at FutureMoneyTrends.com. I'm here with a very special guest today, the former U.S. Energy Secretary, Spencer Abraham. He's also a former U.S. Senator. He is currently the chairman and CEO of the Abraham Group, as well as the chairman of Uranium Energy Corp's advisory board. Thank you for joining us today, sir.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Mr. Secretary, I want to start off with the conflict in Russia. A lot of people have seen what's going on over there, and it's kind of giving them great concern because the U.S. is sending military ships in the region. Do you think that a physical conflict between the U.S. and Russia could ever be on the table?
I really don't. I don't see that as a possibility. We have a lot of things that are going on between the two countries on the international front where we don't see eye to eye, but I don't see any of that leading in the direction of any kind of armed conflict. But I do think that it will affect the relationships between the countries in terms of their economic relationships and diplomatic relationships, and that there'll be a continued a set of things that we don't have agreement on. On the other hand, I expect that in these situations sometimes a lot more posturing goes on than anything else, and we're seeing a certain amount of that, I think, from the Russian side. But I do think at the end of the day, I don't foresee any kind of physical conflict.
Mr. Secretary, we hear a lot about how important Russia is to Europe with their natural gas exports. Does the U.S. have any exposure or energy risks that are directly tied to Russia?
Well, it's interesting. Over recent years, as you know, we've had a tremendous renaissance and resurgence in our oil and gas sectors, and because of that, we're now producing as much as any country on the planet. And as a consequence of that, we're much more self-sufficient and a much better position, really, to provide ourselves with the energy we need in terms of oil and gas. The one area that does present a challenge actually relates to our fleet of nuclear power plants. We have 104 power plants, the most of any country in the world. They consume a huge percentage of the world's uranium, which is then converted into enriched uranium as fuel for the reactors. Interestingly, because things have changed over time, the United States has really diminished the amount of domestic uranium production and fuel enrichment we do, and in fact have come to depend very heavily on the Russian government supplying this kind of fuel and or the uranium to manufacture this fuel to U.S. Utilities. And it is, I think, a subject of some energy security concern because to the extent that we have diminished our own activities in this area, we put ourselves much more in a dependent position, not just on Russia and countries from the former Soviet Union, but really on uranium suppliers all over the planet. And I don't think, given that 20% of our electricity grid is powered by nuclear power plants, that this is a very wise position in which to find ourselves.
So every time uranium comes up, thorium comes up in my inbox, sometimes by a few hundred. So the market has clearly chosen uranium over thorium. But I want to ask you, during your years in government, did you ever look into thorium as a source for clean energy?
Certainly it was one of the things that the department did research on during my tenure, and has done it both before and since my tenure. I don't think anybody has felt that it was, ready to be a substitute, but, I think it's always important to encourage research on new and potential energy sources, and I'm sure it will continue. But yes, we did engage in exploration of that, as have other, administrations over the years.
I think it's fair to say that any energy company on Earth would want and desire to have you on their team, which leads me to ask, what made you decide to partner with Uranium Energy Corp, UEC, as their chairman of their advisory board?
Well, first of all, I've already expressed my concern about the extent to which the U.S. has, been, diminishing its activity in the uranium production area, and I think this is a potential source of energy security challenge to this country. Accordingly, given the opportunity to try to support and help and work with companies who want to develop uranium in the United States and in other places as well, I was attracted by the prospect of helping UEC because one of their main operations really is in Texas, and that's a fruitful potential source of uranium for America. I think they have a very good team. In particular, I've worked closely with their CEO, Amir Adnani, and I think Amir is a very bright young CEO who's got good vision in terms of the direction that energy policy should go, and has done a good job of developing the company and getting it on track. And I think it's an opportunity, really, one of the best opportunities we have to really expand America's domestic uranium production.
Outside of the politics on the front page of the Times, do you think Japan is going to once again become a major buyer of uranium and a nation powered by nuclear energy?
Well, I think the Prime Minister Abe has indicated that's, his hope and desire. Obviously, the Japanese are still recovering from the tragedy at Fukushima. As a consequence of that, set of events, they've shut down most of their nuclear fleet and are only bringing it back slowly because they're obviously deeply concerned about safety, as they should be. But Japan does have the dilemma that it doesn't have a lot of domestic resources to tap for energy production. Nuclear power is something that can truly be, for them, a major source of supply, which would require very minimal importation of resources. And so it makes sense for them, and I think they will pursue, in a safe way, the restarting of as many of their reactors as they can, and I would expect that in the future they would be expanding their fleet to compensate for some that will not come back online.
What kind of risk is there for this event, the Fukushima disaster, to happen again, either somewhere else or specifically here in the U.S.? My thought is, and of course I'm not an expert in this, but I do live in Southern California, and I've always wondered what would happen if the San Andreas Fault has like an 8.5 earthquake. What things are in place to prevent another situation like Fukushima?
Well, I think, first of all, the U.S., since Fukushima, has redoubled its efforts, both from the standpoint of the federal regulatory approach through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but certainly all of the companies who operate nuclear facilities to try to make them as safe as possible. And I think that is what we have done. I think we have an outstanding track record as a country in terms of, the protection of our nuclear fleet. People always can imagine a scenario of something that could happen. I mean, and do their best to do that, but you never, at the end of the day, you never can anticipate everything. But I think that our fleet is very safe and secure. The one thing I have argued for some time has been the building of new nuclear plants to replace some of these older reactors, because, the ones in Japan were ones that were older generation nuclear reactors, and we have a lot of those operating in the United States, whereas the new designs of reactors are ones that would most certainly withstand the kinds of challenges posed at Fukushima, and it makes sense to me to build new reactors that are safer, more efficient, and modern. And I think it's been frustrating to hear some of the anti-nuclear critics argue that we shouldn't be building new reactors, but maintaining simply the ones we have. So it's kind of an unusual position, because even though they claim to be concerned about safety, they would prefer to keep the older reactors online instead of building the newer, safer versions. And I'm in favor of keeping the older ones as long as we can, but being careful about it, and at the same time building some new reactors so that we can, modernize the fleet over time.
Mr. Secretary, on April 16th, 2013, which was literally about a year ago, 6 men attacked a power station in California with AK-47s. These men were not caught. I wanted to ask you, how vulnerable is our energy grid? And could this attack have been some type of dry run?
I'm not terribly exercised by this. I mean, you have a lot of folks who can get worked up about everything from their power bills to, the fact that somebody's transmission line comes too close to their neighborhood. I mean, who knows what the motivation was. But I believe that the biggest threat to worry about is not the physical security of, transmission transmission hubs or things like that. I think it's really the potential of cyber threats, because the grid is very much an information technology marvel, which makes it vulnerable to cyber attack. I'm not saying I think that it could be successful. I'm not, I just think that the area that we need constant vigilance and need to particularly be concerned about. And I think most utility company executives would say that the thing that keeps them up the most at night would be the threat of a cyber attack. But I think in terms of the physical security of the grid, I think most of the companies are very vigilant and can react pretty quickly to any kind of attack like that one, which took place last year.
So I want to move on to oil. Is the cheap oil gone? Even with new innovations like fracking, has the world experienced not peak oil, but peak cheap oil?
Well, I've suggested that in things I've said and written before, because I do think we're finding now that we have a lot of of crude. It's just not as easy to get to. I mean, people that aren't close to the industry sort of, know what they know about oil tends to be what they've seen in movies where somebody, puts a derrick into the ground and immediately oil spurting all over the place. And that's kind of the way it might have been at the beginning back, at the turn of the century or something. But it's changed, and now oil is in more difficult to reach locations and requires a fair amount of extraction or pre-extraction activity, from horizontal drilling to fracking to flooding reservoirs with various things, including CO2, I might add. And so those things are costly. And a lot of the oil which is extracted isn't perfect and ready to go to a refinery, down the street. I mean, it requires further processing. So I do think the process of producing oil, of extracting it and developing it, is becoming more expensive. That's the bad news. The good news is that because of these new technologies, we're finding more and more of it here in the United States, which has helped us to dramatically reduce our dependence on imported oil, and that's a good thing.
In 100 years, is the U.S. still a petroleum-based economy?
Well, it's pretty hard to prophesize, that far into the future. I do not foresee the United States, at this point, based on the development of new energy technologies, I don't think we're going to be, only, using oil. I think at the same time, I don't see a world where we aren't using oil in some fashion. But, innovations and technological advances are moving at great pace. And so, one should never say never on these kinds of issues, because we have brilliant minds working in laboratories and research facilities all over the planet, and there's no telling what kind of exciting things will be coming over the course of 100 years. But certainly in the shorter term, we should assume that petroleum will continue to play a major role.
I've seen these different things from, where India will have a car that runs on air, or I've heard President Carter talk about a car that ran on ocean water. When you were in as the Secretary of Energy and through the different research you've done, have you ever come across anything like this that just hasn't been advanced?
Well, there are, great deal of research is going into fusion, nuclear fusion at this point, which would be a very clean way and a safe, much safer, if it ever were, perfected way of power generation. But everybody acknowledges if that will work, we aren't going to know it for a long time, and it's a long way off. But there are things on the drawing boards that are out there. It's just that most of them are very complicated to develop and don't, on a per dollar basis, provide the kind of energy that the world either has come to expect or needs going forward. When we realize that a large part of the world remains without electricity, that we have in developing countries very few people who are able to afford the kinds of personal items that require electricity, but they will as those countries develop. The growth of energy demand is going to continue, and it would be great if we could, magically discover something new. Hopefully we can develop a lot of these kinds of more esoteric energy sources, but it's doubtful that any of them are going to instantaneously be game changers. But collectively, we hope they can all contribute to the overall world demand.
Final question, sir. Are any of our trading partners, specifically in the Middle East, concerned about the value of the dollar in regards to the overwhelming debt burden the U.S. has placed on itself and QE from the Fed? Is anyone, I guess I'm asking, is anyone worried about the petrodollar as a medium of exchange, that it might lose it one day?
Well, from time to time you hear, people sort of rattling the saber about, moving away from the dollar. You had this happening a few years ago, people talking about the euro instead, but then all of a sudden the European economic situation changed, and you haven't heard much of that talk lately. But the dollar enjoys the confidence of everybody on the planet, and anyone who's traveled abroad knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I think that while you may have, for political reasons, people make allusions to finding an alternative, international currency to depend on and so on, that a lot of it is just talk. And at least at the moment, I don't see anything that's serious at all out there that suggests that type of change. But, that doesn't mean people won't, from time to time, for political reasons or other reasons, want to speculate. But I again, just say to anybody who's traveled internationally, it's pretty consistent wherever you go. The dollar is regarded with confidence and seen as a secure currency, and I think that's the reason it remains and will continue to remain as the principal, mechanism by which energy exchanges are judged.
Secretary Abraham, Chairman and CEO of the Abraham Group, as well as the Chairman of Uranium Energy Corp's Advisory Board. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Thanks. Good to be with you, and appreciate it. Thank you.